Good morning, kids. This is in continuation of your first lecture on the climatic change. In the previous lecture, we have defined what climatic change is and we have listed its characteristics, and we have also discussed the impact of the temperature rises all across the globe. The present lecture helps us to understand the role of climatic change in reducing the disaster risk. We will come across the concepts of this rise in sea levels due to the temperatures and the impact of it, and we will be discussing about the risk encountered due to this natural disasters which are a result of this temperature rises, and we will discuss about the various strategies and protocols along with the adaptation principles, followed by the conclusions. Moving ahead, the impacts of the climatic change, if we see, we have already seen that the temperature rises are impacting the ecosystems, the water bodies, the coasts, etc. Apart from that, as we have seen, the availability of water is increasing at higher latitudes because of the melting of ice. If the same happens, then the water levels in the water bodies, large water bodies, will increase, thereby immersing these coastal areas. And also there is a scientific evidence that the increase in sea temperatures, surface temperatures, will result in more number of cyclones and also heighten the storm surges. So if the surface temperatures increase, then automatically more number of cyclones do appear, and also there will be an higher opportunity of flooding of low-lying areas and the coastal areas. There is a report that the countries in the Middle East are going to be affected on a very large scale because of this increased cyclone activity and higher flooding. I will show you the map of the world. This is the Middle East. As you can see, this Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, these countries, they will be the worst affected because of the increase in the water levels. These countries majorly depend upon the sea activities. They depend upon the sea for transportation, they depend upon the fishing. So if these are going to be affected, then their GDP also will decrease. There was a flooding. I will show you an example. See, there was a flooding in 2008. See the second point here. Floods is one of the most recurrent disaster events which destroy development progress and also hinder the economic stability in that particular region. See the 2008 floods in Yemen. It has resulted in nearly $1.7 billion damage. See the poverty rate. It has increased from 28 to 51%. This is all just because of the climatic changes. If the climate worsens, if the temperature rises, more cyclones, more flooding. See, these countries which are majorly dependent upon the seas, see the damages which are being incurred by these countries. One more thing is the Egypt. You all know Egypt is one of the fertile areas of the Africa and the Middle East, and which is one of the largest populous country in that particular region. See, there is an estimation that if the sea level rises and the storm surges intensify, nearly 2.67 million people of Egypt, they will face a problem. And see here, the first point here, The increasing frequency and intensity of the natural disasters, they pose serious challenge to the sustainability of development investments and the stability of economic growth in the region. So, if the frequency of the cyclones and the floods do increase, then nobody will come forward to invest in that particular country. So, the economic development will hinder. So, the economic growth will not progress, and there will be no sustainability of the developments. So, we are supposed to consider this climatic change on a large scale. Proper actions are to be taken. See, this are all the same examples which you can go through. We will see how to adapt ourselves. We do have two things now. One, because of this increase in temperatures, the cyclones are going to come more frequently. There will be an increased rate of flooding. So we do have two things now. One, either we mitigate these things or we get adapted to these things. As I always do say in the class, if you are in a war, you fight the war, or else you flee from the war. One, we are supposed to adapt it. We are supposed to get adapted to that. Number two, we are supposed to move away from that. Not just moving away or running away from that. We are supposed to try to minimize that. So, how to define this disaster risk reduction and adaptation? These two are the definitions particular to this one. You can go through these definitions, and this is the simple picture what we can do. See, because of the human interference, we are experiencing the climatic changes, and because of the climatic changes, we do have a lot of impacts. There are many vulnerabilities in this one. So we are supposed to take some policies. These policies will be giving some responses. So either we have to mitigate the human and finally move on to the human interferences, or we are supposed to adopt ourselves to these things. Now, see, the United Nations organization, see, this is about the initiatives which have been taken by the different summits. The United Nations organization always has been taking various initiatives to control this temperature rises. There were many summits and conferences, as we have seen already in the previous presentation, which have been taken up. So these are the few things what they are planning it. They want to assist the governments and the national actors. It's not film actors, it's the national actors, those people who are involved in taking the national decisions, to link their disaster risk reduction and also adaptation efforts. They want to promote this development of information and tools and the usage of this SHOGO framework. SHOGO framework, which we have discussed in our last topic. And see here, these are the various related measures which are taken with respect to UNFCCC, HUGO framework related, IPCC, and also GRAR. So these are the different initiatives which have been taken up in the recent past. You can go through them. And coming to the mitigation, what we are supposed to observe when we are going to take measures on mitigative measures. Before taking the measures concerned to the mitigation, what the topics, this is an attempt to understand where we are supposed to concentrate to control this temperature rises. The first one is, we are supposed to stabilize the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. This has become the biggest problem nowadays. Stabilize at least if you can't minimize it, try to stabilize the greenhouse gases. That was the first concern. The second concern is about, as we have already discussed, the food production will decrease if the temperatures go on increasing because of lower water availability. So make sure that the food production is not threatened. And you are supposed to make sure that the economic development will be progressing in a sustainable manner. So keeping these three things in view, you are supposed to take any mitigative measures. Once again repeating, stabilization of greenhouse gases, taking care of the food production such that it is not minimized, and also enabling your economic development in a sustainable manner. So the Kyoto Protocol, which I want to mention it once again. In the Kyoto Protocol, if you observe, you can go through the internet regarding this Kyoto Protocol. It primarily aims at reducing the carbon emissions by various parts of the world, particularly the countries. The countries have been divided into two types, developed countries and developing countries. And the CO2 emissions are to be controlled by these developed and also developing countries. So what they proposed is, if a developed country, let us suppose, if its CO2 emissions are too higher, and there is a very much undeveloped country, let us suppose a country in Africa which has no development, so you can trade your CO2 emissions with that country. Thereby, you can, let us suppose, if I keep a level of 10 units of CO2 emissions to USA, but it is having 15 units of CO2 emissions. Now it is having 5 emissions which are to be curtailed. If it is not possible by them, then you take any country, undeveloped country in Africa, let us suppose its emissions are 0 and it is also having a level of 10. So you can transfer your 5 emissions to that country. So overall your level stays at 10 and their level is also at 5, which is far below the target 10. So because you have transferred them, you make sure that that country develops in some or other. So by this means you can go with the carbon trading. So the Kyoto Protocol aims at limiting the carbon emissions for both developed and developing countries. And for the electrical engineers, it is too important that because of the Kyoto Protocol, we are more concerned about the green energy. We are reducing the carbon emissions, particularly because of this coal industry, which are arising because of the coal industry. And the adaptation process. And see, the adaptation, you are supposed to adapt to these climatic changes, not only by yourself but also by your community, by the state, by the government also, by the central governments also, by nationwide also. You are supposed to adapt yourselves. So you are supposed to, when in a country is supposed to adapt itself, it is supposed to identify what sort of climatic changes it is experiencing. It is supposed to assess the risks, and finally you are supposed to take some measures. So first identify the changes, understand the risks, and next suggest suitable measures for adaptation. That is a process which you are supposed to do in adaptation. And finally the conclusions. Climatic change is the biggest threat for sustainable development, and the global community is to be united and fight for its own existence. If we neglect this temperature rises and if we neglect this climatic changes, then at one time our own existence will be a big question mark on this planet. So we must stand tall, we must stand united to protect ourselves on our very own planet Earth. So for this, you are supposed to provide a wide awareness among the people, and developing countries must take care about the CO2 emissions and make sure that the economic development is also being met, and proper measures are to be taken for both mitigation and adaptation. And I hope everybody works out voluntarily in controlling the climate on our very own planet Earth. Thank you, one and